Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Association of the United States Army Institute of Land Warfare Equipment Modernization Panel. The Institute of Land Warfare is proud to continue its long-standing tradition of facilitating shared dialogue in an effort to inform individuals on critical issues inherent to the modernization of the United States Army. This year's Equipment Modernization Panel moderator is Ms. Mary Miller. Ms. Miller is an esteemed member of the S&T community and currently serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Research and Technology. She is a principal proponent and the accountable senior Army official for senior technology and engineering, spanning 16 laboratories and centers. Prior to her current assignment, she served as the Deputy Program Executive Officer for the Soldier. I will now pass it to Ms. Miller, who will introduce the other esteemed members of this panel.
Thanks, Pete. Pete and I used to work together right before he retired from the Army. He was my battle buddy down at TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command, trying to better advise the Army S&T community how to do their investments. So thank you, and thank you for inviting us to do this panel. We're going to have a great session today, I believe, because we're changing it up a little bit. Instead of the typical everybody gets to say their piece and do their little speech, we're just going to go direct to questions and answers. So be prepared, and in that context, we will have people in the aisles that will have cards that you can write your questions on. We will collect them up. Whoop, they're already standing up there. We will collect them, and then we will ask the panel. So it could be an interesting time. Yeah. So I have been advised by two people that do have an influence on my rating that all tough questions go to staffers or industry. So sorry, panel. However, I do thank you for this opportunity to be here. I think we are going to have a great discussion on the Equipment Modernization Panel. And let me start by introducing to you the people on this illustrious panel, starting with the panel chair, the Honorable Ms. Heidi Shyu. She is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. She also serves as the Army Acquisition Executive, the Senior Procurement Executive, the Science Advisor to the Secretary of the Army, and the Army Senior Research and Development Official. Now, you thought you had a lot to take care of. She is very busy. In addition, she has the principal responsibility for all Department of Army matters related to logistics. Ms. Shyu's previous experience includes several leadership positions, most recently as the VP of Technology Strategy for Raytheon Company's Space and Airborne Systems. She is a technology advocate. I found her to be a great asset as the Army Acquisition Executive. She actually understands what we're saying when we talk science and technology. Great day for me. Next to her, you see Lieutenant General James Barkley. He is the Deputy Chief of Staff, the Army G8, serving at the Army's lead for matching available resources to the defense strategy and the Army plan. As you can imagine, this is a difficult position to be in this time of day, and he has been facing this challenge with his usual candor and working on behalf of the Army. He has integrated Army fielding and funding with the equipping actions, some hard choices. Prior to his current leadership assignment, he served as the Army's Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for the Army G357, and he has also served in various aviation leadership roles, which is where I have last worked with General Barkley as we crafted what the Army Science and Technology Aviation Program for the future should be. Next to General Barkley is Lieutenant General Patricia McQuiston, who is currently serving as the Deputy Commanding General of the Army Materiel Command, the Army's premier provider of materiel readiness, ensuring dominant land force capability for U.S. warfighters and our allies. She previously served as the Commanding General of the Army Sustainment Command at Rock Island and as the Commanding General of the 21st Theater Sustainment Command for U.S. Army Europe and 7th Army in Germany. General McQuiston represents the Army's organic industrial base and over 70% of the Army's scientist and engineering community. Following General McQuiston, we have two of our Army staff, the Hill staff representation, because we're going to change it up a little bit and find out what Congress thinks. well, representative aspects of Congress. Next to General McQuiston, you have Dr. Robbie Samantha Roy. He is a professional staff member on the Senate Armed Services Committee with a broad area of responsibility for the Department of Defense's wide spectrum of science and technology-related activities. His previous positions include Assistant Director for Space and Aeronautics at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, Principal Strategic Analyst with the Congressional Budget Office, and Research Staff Member in the Systems Evaluation Division of the Institute for Defense Analysis in Alexandria. Next to him, you find Mr. Kevin Gates. He is also a professional staff member with the House Armed Services Committee, responsible for the Information Technology and Cyber Operations portfolio, as well as the Science and Technology portfolio. You see, we have somewhat of a theme going on. Previously, Kevin worked at Strategic Analysis in nearby Arlington, Virginia, for a variety of clients within the DoD Science and Technology community, as well as the Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency and the Intelligence Committee. On your far right, we have a large panel. Bear with me. On your far right, you will see our two members who will provide insights from industry. Mr. Johnny Barnes is the Vice President for Intelligence at IBM. Mr. Barnes has over 35 years of experience with IBM, holding a variety of positions from product development to systems architecture design to executive. His positions have included a number of critical IBM product and strategy task force responsible for establishing the future technical and business direction at IBM. Mr. Barnes has also worked to re-engineer IBM's internal hardware development, global computing, and communications environments, and to grow IBM's public sector transformation services business. And finally, Ms. Angela Messer joins us from Booz Allen Hamilton, where she is Executive Vice President, leading the Emerging Technologies and Mission Solutions team within the firm's Strategic Innovations Group. Previously, she led the firm's Army business within the broader defense market, providing services in key mission areas to include C4ISR and IT, acquisition, program management, and logistics research and development. So as you can see, we have a well-versed group, one that should be able to field, if not answer, all of your questions, and we are hopeful that you will engage with us and ask the questions that will be interesting to you. I will like to set the stage. I'm sure as you've been here, we are now in the second day of AUSA. You have heard time and time again that we are facing significant budget challenges. I don't need to emphasize how important it is that we make the right choices now to prepare the Army of the future. What we will talk about today on this panel are the challenges presented by modernization in an area of constrained resources. You will hear a bit about the struggles that this challenge has given us and the choices and how we go about making those choices. So I will cut to the chase and we will start the questions. I had some to get people started, but we are really looking for your input. As you write your questions, I would ask that penmanship matters so I can actually read them. And also that if you're interested, I'd be interested in knowing, are you from industry? Are you from government? Are you from academia? Are you from small business? So that we know how we need to communicate our message. If we're not getting our message out, knowing where our questions are coming will help us to make sure we get it out in the future. So we're going to start. And my first question is going to go to General Barkley. At the congressional breakfast this morning, the Chief of Staff of the Army talked about the impact of sequestration on the Army, specifically the front-loading of cuts that put the Army at risk in modernization and readiness, while we work to draw down our manpower. Given the fiscal realities of a declining budget, how does the Army balance its portfolio, and what are the implications to Army modernization?
Well, I think, this is not news to anyone. If you've been watching, reading newspapers or watching the last several weeks, but as we started looking forward to the future for our Army, we knew we were going to have some major challenges, and there's only really three places we can take money. You've got the force structure, you've got modernization, and then you've got readiness. And we knew that based on, really, this started in 12, when you had the BCA, Budget Control Act, last year 13, going into 14, we were just reacting. So now we're trying to develop the way-ahead plan to how we're going to deal with that in the out years, 15 to 19, because it is pretty clear, as the chief said this morning, we don't see an end in sight, and it looks like we will be living with the Budget Control Act for the next about 8 years now. But the impact of that, if you front load up front and they're exacting that cost from you, as I said, we have very few places we can go to get money. And so we're going to have some tough times from about the 15 to 18, maybe 19 window, to where we are going to take some risk with our modernization and some risk with our readiness. Both of those areas we will come down. We're going to have to pay the price to meet the budget cuts that the Army is going to be taking our share of. Because in force structure, you just can't get there. We think it's probably going to take us about 3 to 4 years. We're going to start a ramp. We're already on a ramp. As most of you know, we started about a year and a half ago at a 570,000 man force. We're going to close out this year somewhere in the 520s. We're looking to get to 490 by FY15, and then depending on some of the other decisions as we go through this year's fall review, we'll have a ramp that will continue to drive us down if we have to in force structure. But it takes a while. You know, it's very hard as you're looking at a force of soldiers and their families that have been fighting for this country for the last 12 years, and then you're starting to tell them it's time to go do something else and go home. So we have to be very careful about that. And also it costs you money as you start your separation program. So you just can't, ask 50, 60, 70,000 soldiers to exit in 1 year, because that cost would then be very high. So I guess what I'm saying is we know we're going to have a bathtub, a trough here from about 15 through 18. We had to take the risk in modernization and the risk in readiness, and I'm sure that Pat can talk about some of the readiness side and Ms. Shyu the modernization side, but that's the choices that the senior leaders so far have made, and we're going to try to do the best we can with the budget money, the amounts that we get, and then hopefully by the 18, 19, 20 time frame, we'll start correcting that to bring the Army back in balance again.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, this question goes to you, Ms. Shyu. While General Barkley has been your battle buddy in defending Army modernization resources, he has given you an incredible challenge. What is the Army's acquisition strategy for coping with these budget restraints and getting the best value for the taxpayer in support of the warfighter?
Thanks for a great question, Harry. I'll remember her. It's great. It's rating time. But all teasing aside, one of the key things that we're doing is we're looking at just exactly what General Barkley talked about. The force structure is coming down. So therefore, our procurement quantities is coming down. We don't need to buy as much stuff if we don't have as many soldiers, right? So it's one thing that we're looking at is reducing our quantity to match our end strength. The second piece that we talked about, there are efficiency that can be gained. For example, if you do a multi-year buy, it's a lot cheaper on the unit cost. The Army saves money by going to multi-year. So we're looking at efficiencies that we can gain, okay? The other thing is, this is a piece that ties into AMC. We're divesting older equipment that we no longer use, that's been sitting around for a long, long time because we're good hoarders. Right? So we can get rid of this old stuff and reduce our maintenance cost. And then it ties into what are we doing in terms of modernizing our aging platforms, right? So we have programs that's ongoing that's modernizing our aging platforms. You guys have heard about AMPV. It's going to modernize our M113s, right? Our PIM is going to modernize our Paladin. So we're doing a number of modernization programs. The other thing that we're doing incremental upgrades to our capabilities. You see that within all of our platform programs, right? Either as vehicles or our aviation platform. We do incremental upgrades in terms of capabilities. And if there's capabilities we don't currently have that we want in the future, that's where we're doing the modernization piece. As an example, Currently, we have stovepipe air missile defense systems. So what are we doing? We're integrating all the missile defense systems together to provide common backbones, to have a common operating environment, common operating picture. So those are the stuff we're doing in the modernization world, right? Giving us capabilities that we currently don't have. Then we talked about critical S&T, investing S&T to give us the leap ahead technology, to give us the next generation capability that we will need, that we currently don't have. For example, one quick example, the next environment we're going to fight in very likely will be a lot more contested than the current environment we're in. What does that mean? That means we probably ought to invest in things that's going to be either degraded visual environment that we have to operate in a more contested environment in which we will be jammed. Okay, so those are just some example of how we try to balance across our portfolio.
Thank you, ma'am. And because General Barkley talked about the impact of the resources on both modernization and readiness and kind of teed up question to both Ms. Shyu and General McQuiston, here's your question, General McQuiston. What do you anticipate the impact of budget uncertainties to be on the organic industrial base and the Army equipment readiness?
Okay, Mary, thank you. Let me start with the organic industrial base and just recap a little bit of what happened this past year. Because of the budget uncertainty in January of 2013, we were told to plan to cancel all third and fourth quarter depot orders and reset. And this had a significant psychological as well as a physical impact on the workforce, as our industrial sites were all asked to deviate from what we had been planning and programming for the prior 2 years. So this caused delays in a lot of our manufacturing and our remanufacturing and our modernization of those weapon systems and in our ammunition programs. And it caused us to shift skills from areas that did not have funded work in those industrial sites to areas where there was work, but we could have had workforce mismatches. So that caused us to have a lot of folks that had planned to come and work on maybe an M1 tank, and were told because there was no M1 work that they were going to be doing other indirect skills for that workday. And this happened repetitively through the whole fiscal year. And so what that causes, of course, is that you are not able to earn revenue on your funded work. On your unfunded work. You can't earn revenue, and so the cost of producing those units goes up. And therefore your rates go up, and you get into a cycle. You all understand in industry, as your rates go up, you become less and less competitive to those folks that you are trying to get business with. So that is something that they all had to overcome and deal with. Then we furloughed the workforce at our industrial sites for 6 days in the historically most productive months of the fiscal year. And then in the last 2 months, we received $759 million worth of new orders, not just from the Army, but from our sister services and some of our other allies. So that's bad news and good news. The bad news is that was work that just came in. We couldn't induct all the equipment. We couldn't perform that work and earn revenue for fiscal year 13. So we had an increase to what we had planned to carry into fiscal year 14. Delay of work, shift into the next fiscal year. The good news is the same thing. We were able to shift that cushion of work into fiscal year 14 because we came into this fiscal year without a budget, without a CR. Our industrial sites were authorized to work. They were exempted from furlough, and so that $759 million gave us a little bit more of a cushion to start the fiscal year out and work those products. So lack of a budget, late funding, and it just plays havoc on our ability to plan and execute as efficiently as we want to. It increases the rates we must charge our customers down the road in the future next time. Another significant impact for our organic industrial base that we face in the future is just revitalization of some of our facilities. We have put as much money as we've been able to over the last 12 years in some of our upgrading some of our facilities, but there's a lot of the industrial base that is was built for World War II or earlier. Watervliet Arsenal celebrated its 200th anniversary. Some of those facilities are showing their age. It's not the age, but it is the condition of the facilities that we have to address. So General Vi has made that certainly one of our focus areas to revitalize the organic industrial base. And even in times of lower funding
No
levels.
money.
That's the answer all the time.
That's the answer they all get is no.
We do have to commit to some revitalization of the industrial base, and the Army has made it a focus area. And so we know it will be low dollars, but we are looking at a really determined effort to, over many, many years, getting our industrial sites back up into the prime condition that they deserve to be at. For reset then, for this fiscal year, we're already experiencing impacts to reset because of lack of OCO funding. So let me take the aviation side of the house here. For aviation, we plan to do an aviation unit over 2 years because you want about 50% of their aircraft in reset at one time and 50% available to train. We started fiscal year 13 with a budget submission of $520 million, and that was going to reset 385 aircraft. After the Budget Control Act and after sequestration cuts, we ended the fiscal year with $327 million, and we did 274 aircraft. That's 111 fewer than we had planned to do in fiscal year 13. So that work shifts into 14. We've had to delay aircraft inductions this year because of uncertain times and furlough of people, so that is already delayed what we had planned to do this year a couple of months. Now, let me assure you that all of the units that are scheduled to deploy had their aircraft reset. But there are 22 other aviation units whose reset timelines are going well beyond what we had planned to have them back up and operational for training. So what's the requirement? Let me just tell you for aviation. We have 388 aircraft deployed right now. We have 172 that are already awaiting reset because it's been delayed. We have 184 more that we'll schedule to deploy before end of operations, and so that gives us a requirement of 744 aircraft. That is 3 years, about 3 years worth of work at the current pace. So that's what it's doing. On the tactical side, certainly our units' ability to order repair parts has delayed their, has certainly degraded their readiness levels at the unit, and deferment of maintenance will continue to have impacts this year and in years to come. So that's all things that we have to balance. Although we said that, readiness we are going to take risk in. We're going to have to prioritize units who will be the most ready, and then we'll have to take risk in other units.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, no hard questions for my Hill friends. I do have a question from your perspective, and Dr. Roy, Samantha Roy. What risks are most prevalent as investments decline in the near term, from your perspective?
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Ms. Shyu and Ms. Miller for inviting me to this esteemed panel. And also, I'd like to caveat my comments that these are my personal comments and do not represent the official views of the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Do they have a view?
So with that, I will take that question, not for the record. So I think what is very important, and there, I was talking to a colleague of mine who actually handles the broader Army, the programs of record, the large modernization programs, and he was telling me that there's a famous quote that goes around in the Army that goes something like this, that amateurs worry about strategy, dilettantes worry about tactics, and it's professionals that worry about logistics. But what we'd like to add to that is the people that really know what's going on worry about people and human resources. So one of the things that I'd like to actually, address in the sort of the unprecedented situation we are today, where we are at war still, but we have a step function, a very sharp step function within our budget situation. What we really have to address is ultimately from a science and technology perspective, how are we going to really attract at the national security defense environment the best and the brightest scientists and engineers, the technicians, even the acquisition professionals. That's what I really worry about the most, because ultimately it's about people. And so when we have a situation where, we have folks working in the government that have the financial situations, the ability for them to actually, the limitations on traveling to conferences, you can even tell the presence with the Army here today. It does have a long-term eroding influence on the workforce. And that's what I really worry about, because ultimately, in today's world where technology is really globalized, We worry about innovation, and innovation really in my mind has two components. One is not only the sophistication of your technology, because we ultimately have to stay ahead of a near-peer adversary, but it's also the speed of innovation. And so even though, as I think General Ordinero mentioned this morning, where, in Afghanistan we're dealing with, I think he put it like a 15th century adversary, in some sense one can argue, but the speed at which they can operate in terms of technological advances to counter some of our technologies, how are we going to keep up with that? And ultimately, the heart of that is really going to be to get really bright young people that are able to innovate within our enterprise, our science and technology enterprise. I think General McQuiston also mentioned another big issue, which is infrastructure. Now, you mentioned it on sort of the depot level. I worry, and actually my colleagues on the Hill also worry about the science and technology infrastructure. If you look across the roughly or so 1,100 facilities across the Army's S&T enterprise, about anywhere from about a third or so fall within a category where there are significant, negative influence. Basically, the status of those facilities are such that there are significant negative impact to their mission. So we have to worry about the infrastructure, the people, and then ultimately we also have to worry about that we are working on the right sort of scientific and technological, advances to basically keep up with our adversaries. So those, I think, are really some of the big challenges that I see facing from a science and technology perspective across the broad Army's S&T enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, if it's okay, I would like to just interject a couple of additional comments.
I should state, for the panel members, you can comment on any question and answer that has happened to date. If you just want to jump in, just flag me.
Unless it's mine.
I think I would echo Robbie's comments also about these being my own and don't reflect the committee. But I think the important thing here is not any specific risk that we're taking on as these investments decline, but I think it's the permanent loss of capability that we're going to see as these short-term decisions are made in terms of trading off one thing for another. So as the chief mentioned earlier, where we have the flexibility to take near-term cuts are in these things like modernization and readiness, and unfortunately we're not going to see the longer-term effects of that until unfortunately when it's too late. I think a number of people have echoed similar comments in terms of worrying about hollowing of the force. What I think that is the concern here is that you've gone well past cutting fat and cutting into muscle and bone into core capabilities that not just the Army but the other services need as well to be able to provide I think what is the important long-term capability, which is the ability to hedge for uncertainty. So it's not just a matter of having a force structure to go against Soviet armored forces across the Fulda Gap. It's the ability to have flexible forces that can pivot very quickly to address whatever the challenge of the day is that crops up. And so that ability to hedge, that ability to have a certain core capability that's always in reserve that you can reconstitute on a very quick turn to be able to address those challenges is important. And ultimately what it leads to is fewer arrows in the quiver to be able to deal with whatever the challenge of the day is. The CSIS did an interesting study, I think it was earlier this year, where they looked and they did a comparison of the investment trends after major drawdowns. And one of the big discriminators that they saw based on this downturn was the fact that we didn't have the level of investment banked up over that period where funds were flush to see us through a period of austerity. And so it's that lack of depth at this point in terms of having a reserve that you can reach back into for capability that, from my perspective, should be sort of most worrisome for us.
Thank you. So I will go to you, sir. Often industry works current, next, and next generation products. how do you at IBM position yourself in the market to address 3 generations of products? And what lessons can you give us, the Army, as we are struggling with that balance?
Okay. Within IBM, we have, I'll say, 3 streams of work activity that helps us bridge into the future as well as address near-term tactical kinds of functionality that we need from a product standpoint. I'll talk about research. We have a large research organization, still one of the largest in the world. A number of research organizations have faded, and IBM's research organization is still fairly productive in delivering capability, but we had to go through a transformation. That research organization, where in the past was doing pure research on whatever the researcher decided was of interest to him or her, to now being very focused on filling gaps and delivering on product capability. So the way that we manage that is the lines of business are responsible for 50% of the research budget. It really focuses researchers into delivering capability that really is influencing the product in the 3 to 5 year time period. There's another set of researchers in IBM that are focused on technology that has direct relationship to products and capabilities that are needed in the marketplace, but are more 5+ years out. That is another fairly significant portion of the budget, but still not over 50%. And then a small portion of the budget is actually in research, is dedicated to just pure research. We have a process in place in research to govern and assess that capability, and those areas of research to determine which ones would get funding. And so we manage this transition from research, and as many of you know, the transition from research into actual capability is the bigger problem. And so this partnership with the lines of business was an attempt by us to address that transition. And researchers actually transition into development to facilitate that movement of capability. That gives us the 3 to plus year capability. Within the development shop, we have 2 areas of focus. One that's clearly delivering within the 12 to 18-month period of time, products capabilities that's very focused on customer requirements. And then there are incentives within the development organization that really drives the developers while they're doing the current work to look at new ideas and out-of-the-box thinking that helps them focus on new capabilities that no one is focused on today between research or development, but they're new ideas. And we do that through a lot of awards that are given based on inventions. Many of you know IBM has the largest portfolio of patents every year. It's driven because there's money involved. And we incent a lot of the developers to do that. A lot of our innovation comes out of that category as well as from research. So we manage that process, and there's a technical assessment of all of these capabilities across IBM worldwide. There is a committee that will do evaluations of that. And it's not just the technology. IBM had to transition for value and understand how technology, emerging technologies will drive value to the business. And researchers and developers were not very good at that. Today, they're very focused on that. And as they build their arguments for investment in these technologies, there's a component that says, how will it impact the business? And these committees that are formed really evaluate that and determine how IBM's money will be invested. And then along with that, we do have one community as a whole what we call jams to get new ideas from the community as a whole. And there's a pool of money that's set aside to incent those individuals and those ideas. They're selected, prioritized, and those that get selected or invested in individuals are able to go off and pursue those areas. So that's how we direct real research and inventive ideas into the product cycle. And we are really trying to eliminate a lot of technology that IBM has developed that we really don't take forward, and others have taken it and delivered to the marketplace more effective than IBM, but we've done a much better job of that in the transformation of our research and development activities.
Thank you. Ms. Messer, you have the benefit of being able to look across the Department of Defense, other agencies, and industry and provide advice and guidance. What emerging technologies or processes do you see that could help the Army given the current budget scenario?
Thank you, Ms. Miller. I'd like to also say that it's also an honor to be on this prestigious panel and to be engaged with you this afternoon. It's interesting, when you have a horizontal view across all these different markets, it's amazing how you see a lot of common issues. From an emerging technology standpoint, we just recently had a dialogue, actually with one of our commercial clients, a Fortune 5 company. And believe it or not, they're asking the same questions. I mean, they're also looking at emerging technologies. They're looking at efficiencies. But if I could say 4 themes that are common, though, amongst all our different clients is let's get small, let's get fast, let's get efficient, and let's get insight. So if you look at the technologies, in fact, we actually sat down and had a dialogue on this one. We came up with 25 different categories, and I wanted to talk about more disruptive and more maverick type of IT and technologies, not the things that we're obviously seeing today. We're obviously seeing cloud, we're seeing big data, we're seeing the digital enterprise, the explosion of mobile, social, and all those things combined, couple that with issues on cyber. But they wanted to look beyond that. So what I thought I'd share was, taking those 25 different more emerging technologies, kind of set the context for some technologies that might apply to soldiers, that might apply to platforms, and that might apply actually to information and to computing. I also set the context here about the difference between invention and innovation. Invention being creating something new that hasn't been done before, and innovation taking those capabilities that have been invented and building upon it or creating something more valuable. A great example is Steve Jobs. I set that as context because some of these emerging technologies are here, but they haven't really been built on and pulled together with other new kind of capabilities to see the future. So let's start with the soldier. I think from a soldier aspect, there are tremendous types of physical and cognitive technologies that are trying to address performance, fatigue, and learning, and really being able to detect and understand sort of what's going on in the soldier's body and in their mind. Some of the ubiquitous, inexpensive sensors, by the way, that are already out there, such as health monitors, are being expanded upon and innovated upon, where not only are they getting smaller and miniaturized, but we look at nanotechnology and how nanotechnologies are actually being applied to medicines, to other products, whether soldiers are wearing them, or actually whether they're ingesting or they're actually injecting. So there's a whole bunch of technologies that I think that are going on from that standpoint. Another set of technologies are effective systems that not only interpret sentiment and text from voice, but also now are interpreting emotions. So see what the impact that could be to soldiers when they understand where their emotional psyche is at, and being able to make decisions and able to help them with resilience and, of course, health. And not to say the least, the explosion of new and emerging biometrics and the application of biometrics and identity. I mean, clearly even the iPhone 5S is having biometrics on it. So we're going to see that application across the board to anything our soldiers touch. Platforms. So 2 things on platforms that we're seeing from emerging technology that I think could be relevant to the Army. One has to do with sustainment. Many of us know about 3D printing. But if you think of 3D printing on steroids, you can imagine, even if you take like the 10 simplest type of advanced materials, and you take that to the leading edge, to be able to have that kind of production and the ability to actually impact our logistics systems to include especially modernization right there in the front lines. I think we're going to see that for the next 10 years of how we really take 3D and take it to the next level. Another thing on platforms which is intriguing, which is also here, is driverless cars. Cars that never park and cars that don't need external coordination because they're talking to each other. And so if you look at what Google's doing there and what other companies are now starting to emerge and what the Department of Transportation is doing, particularly on their connected vehicle program, our vehicles today generate at 100 times a second some information about where I am, not only about the maintenance of the car and what they're doing. If you can imagine that we're using that technology and really applying it to the next several years where the car in front of you hit a pothole, it is signaling for 5 cars back to not only avoid it, but to automatically adjust seatbelts for that passenger. This ability to connect this data and this information and the sensors that are now on these vehicles is, I think, going to be definitely an impact to how the military can do business and save lives. And then finally, I think in information and computing, no doubt about it, quantum computing enables just a whole different era of magnitude of computational capacity and I think new massives, parallel processing and programming. Now, what's that mean to the Department of Defense and to the Army? Well, it will change the game in terms of security. It will change in terms of the performance impact on communications and I/O, but it's definitely a technology to watch, to learn how to harness and leverage, but also to counter. And then finally, intelligent agents, reasoning systems, and machine learning programming languages. They're here, but they keep getting better. And so these agents and reasoning systems are emerging that will, quite frankly, change the game for analytics. When we think about big data, data that has meaning, and the kind of analytics that needs to be on top of it, you use these types of agents and reasoning systems to advance analytics to a degree we haven't seen. There's already existing programs, like I said, like these in the artificial intelligence world, like Psych. But again, they're advancing, and the applications are immense. And then finally, I think when it comes to programming, probabilistic programming is creating, quite frankly, a new programming paradigm for really managing uncertain information. And that's very applicable to the battlefield, very applicable to logistics, very applicable to how we're going to use this type of data to actually predict and to be able to respond.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gates, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just, listening to our industry panelists here made me think of a couple of things. I just wanted to make a controversial assertion. Looking at that, particularly from the Army and the Department of Defense as an adopter of technology coming from industry, the big problem, which I'm sure will surprise everyone, is the fact that the Army, the Department, is not flexible enough in its processes to be able to be adaptive to the changing environment. The acquisition regulations and the directives that are out there sort of conspire against the Army or the Department or any of the other services from really being edge adopters of almost any technology. And trying to attack that timeline is probably, I don't know if there's much that you can do about the regulations themselves, but in terms of attacking the timeline, I think there are things within the purview of the government that could be done to help shorten those timelines. And I sort of jotted a couple of thoughts down. One is as it applies to adoption of industry-developed technology, and the other is as it affects government-developed technology that we want to try to get into the system. One thing that we don't do very well in the government is think about the policy and ethical implications of the technology as it's being developed. It's almost always a response to something coming online. So, for example, thinking about the use of human performance augmentation for soldiers, or to use social media analytics to improve intelligence analysis, these are all things. They don't surprise anybody in industry, but when the rubber meets the road and the department starts thinking about adopting these technologies, they start to realize all of these second, third order effects that no one ever ever consider, because industry doesn't necessarily have to deal with those constraints. In a lot of cases, they are foreseeable, but we don't do a whole lot to try to be proactive about thinking and trying to address the policy issues before we're actually at a point of adopting the technology. The other, and maybe it's sort of related to that, is better use of concept experimentation and prototyping. So in some of these cases, all we want to do is be able to figure out, what would I do if I had XYZ product that's available from industry now? But the system, because it requires us to have some sort of program of record in place to be able to fund it, there's not the flexibility to be able to just to do what-if excursions to see how we might use the technology without necessarily having a defined end state in the end. And related to that, I think, is prototyping, because sometimes we just need, you know, a one-off or a handful of a thing, again, to see how it'll work in a military relevant environment, not because we're going to go out and deploy a whole bunch of these. And so that's as it pertains to industry. As it pertains to government developed technology, and I think other folks mentioned this, the IBM example is probably a good one, where our process breaks down because we don't have adequate mechanisms to do the tech transfer, to get lab developed technology out into a program of record. And so, again, part of it is this concept experimentation to determine, is it worthwhile to take it from the bench out into an operating environment? But because we lack, in some cases, the processes, but definitely from a funding perspective, there's not a real critical mass of funding to be able to pull things out and get it into, pull it out of the lab and to be able to get it in an operational context. And so that's, again, that's just another question. I think it's another area where the declining budgets, it's another symptom where we're starting to see yet another thing that's going to be exacerbated by shrinking budgets.
See, that's why we love having these. I think this is great to bring in, because you're going to get different views here today. And this is someone who's sitting over, well, no, it's not over. We're over on this side of the river, okay? You know, our whole strategy we're looking is we're talking about whether we are, you know, technology makers or technology takers. And that's how we've kind of looked at taking our S&T and looking ahead and saying, here's the things that we know we're good at. Here's the things we're good at in our labs. Here's the things that industry just doesn't have the money, can't get after it, or hasn't been very successful in getting after it. And so that's an approach. As we sit down and look at our modernization program, we do that. And yes, we do have challenges when it comes to our acquisition process and the 5000 series, but I'll also tell you that it's a two-way street. Even if we were able to solve some of those 5000 series concerns about being able to move them faster, and then we've taken that on the last 10 years with our rapid equipping, fielding, the asymmetric warfare groups, all those things where we could turn things fast to get it into the hands of soldiers. But the other aspect of that is, if you don't have predictability in any funding profiles, you cannot go forward to make things happen. You've got to have flexibility. You've got to be able, and I got, you know, that's why we have, you know, Congress and the Senate and the House to, you know, appropriate and authorize, and so, but without some flexibility there, then you cannot go out and take some risk and be able to terminate things on a quick, when you're not seeing anything come back, and move dollars to go somewhere else. So it is a two-way street, and we wrestle very hard with that. Not that it's right or wrong, but those are some of the challenges that we face. But I do think that we have taken a different look to the future now, knowing that we're going to be operating in this physically constrained environment, that we have to do business different. And we are looking, you know, at there are things in information technology and stuff that we know we don't have to probably expend as much of our money, because there's industry out there doing a lot of great things, and we can be a taker and we can apply that to things. But there are other things when you get to armor application and protective systems. There's some of those things that we are good at. Our labs are good at that. We just have to continue to put that investment. Ms. Shyu and I have been very very adamant this year as we've been trying to defend the budget and the fact that, as you all know, everyone goes after your S&T first. It doesn't matter whether you're a service or whether you're an industry. I think the industry leaders will agree it's very hard to protect those S&T dollars or your R&D dollars. They go after those are dollars that are easy because you haven't got anything yet from it, so you can take them. But we have been very I think that's one of the things we've gone into the senior leaders, and I think we've done good this year. If you and kind of looking at the future, we're kind of taking on a year-to-year approach, but we have been able to do probably better than a lot of the other services when it gets to taking care of our S&T, because we see that from the Army's perspective, that really is the only way we can get through this trough or bathtub we're going to be in for about 3 to 5 years, and the risk we're taking on modernization, that we have to still continue to invest and develop those things, whether they're in the prototype lines or whether it's just parking the technology or the designs so you can then bring them back out again.
Yeah, I'd like to pile on to that comment as well. We could be talking about this topic all afternoon, easily. So I would also remind Kevin that a lot of the statutory and the regulatory responsibility that's imposed upon acquisition is not exactly our own making. Okay, believe me, I don't want to file 80 documents to go through each milestone, but a lot of regulation are piled upon us. And every time a program gets in trouble, more regulation, more rules gets imposed upon us. I can tell you, having been the governor for a mere 3 years, in 33 years of my life in industry, I am utterly shocked how little control this poor PM has. The poor PM, I will say, I thought the PM had a lot of control over his program. The PM is a flea on the tail of this dog that's being wiped. The poor guy is utterly shocking, okay? I can tell you the other thing in terms of S&T, we understand. We are not interested in duplicating what commercial industry is already doing. There's no value in us doing that, okay? So we are funding S&T that has a merit to solving an Army problem, okay? We have a lot of expertise in the area of explosives, ammunition, a lot of areas in the armor area for underbody protection, modeling and simulation of survivability. We need that. Who the heck are we going to buy that from otherwise? Okay, so we're going to continue investing area that's absolutely critical to our S&T and for the future of the Army. We need these type of capabilities. Okay, in terms of transition, you're right. We probably haven't done the best job in this world in transition. Neither has any service, I would say. I can tell you a lot of time we work on S&T, but we don't track where things evolve into programs of record and beyond. So this is one place I think we can do a much better job in tracking where are the technology migrating to. So we're going to have long conversations on this. I don't want to take.
I'd just like to add a little bit too. So as Jim Barkley said, you know, the Rapid Equipping Force, we actually did see a lot of commercial technology transition into the force over the last 12 years, pretty rapidly, but on small scales because, you know, we don't have the money to equip everybody with everything, and so we made choices about what we would equip. I would say that because Army Material Command has the Research Development and Engineering Command, we do have prototyping integration facilities, PIFs, in each of our Research Development and Engineering centers, and those PIFs do a lot of work on prototyping and small batches and roll out to things like our Special Operations Forces and our regular forces as well. But again, in smaller batches, and we prove out the technology and we see what sticks, and then we see what will become a program of record. So through processes that, you know, have evolved over the past 12 years, like rapid equipping, and then the network integration evaluations that we're doing now, these are all attempts to be more speedy in our delivery of emerging technologies. And I'd just like to say, Angie, I really liked your description of 3D printing and what we could do. You know, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we, with industry and the National Automotive Center, TARDEC and TACOM, developed this mobile parts hospital, which really is the precursor for 3D, kind of some of the things you're talking about in 3D printing. And we sent these over to Kuwait and Iraq and Afghanistan, and they produce parts right on the spot, those hard-to-get parts that'll fix a system immediately and get it back into the fight. We have part of our RD Ecom also has a forward area science and technology team that has really state-of-the-art fabrication systems. And so we're doing some of that now. I think maybe we need to talk more about what's going on out there, but it's absolutely a precursor. And ma'am, then I just want to say, if the PM is the flea, then the sustainers are the amoeba on the flea of the tail.
And I will let Dr. Samantha Roy have the last word on this, although I had lots to say as well. Over to you, Dr. Roy.
So I just wanted to make another comment what I think is very important about the whole issue of our federal acquisition regulations. Again, these are my personal comments. I think it's very instructive to really understand that Congress as a body is a reactive body. It is not a proactive body. And so many of these regulations that have built up over time, almost as in terms of a geological layer that has now become crustified and petrified, is reactions to basically what I call low probability but high impact events. There have been unfortunate events throughout the history of defense acquisition. And Congress has, in response to these, as you said, low probability but high impact events, has put on not only the belt but the suspenders and the Velcro straps to try to prevent, some of these events from taking place. And what I think is gone missing is a very cold analytical discussion about the opportunity costs that are actually being incurred by a lot of these regulations. And in fact, the Army recently had done some informal analysis on one of their programs that even if they didn't build or even test a certain piece of equipment, that if you went through all the man hours that it would take to actually go through all of the milestones, get all the clearances within the Army for all the regulations and the statutory requirements, then go through OSD, you would still end up spending like half a decade just doing paperwork. And so that, I think, we have to have a dynamic discussion between the government, the Hill, and industry is that cycle of how we're going to develop something is just no longer acceptable in today's globalized, world. So.
Thank you, Robbie. So Kevin Gates has stirred up a lot of things going on today already, and one of the things he said I want to go back to. He said short-term decisions have long-term impacts that aren't always in the best interests of the Army when you put it in the aggregate. And this seems to align very well to what Ms. Shyu was telling you last year at this same forum. And the question that I have gotten a couple questions on this, ma'am, but how do you think things are going? Was this 30-year strategic modernization plan beneficial to you in the planning for the Army of the future? And frankly, from industry, can they get access to the 30-year plan?
So to me, it was very useful. Let me give you some example as to why it's useful. First of all, our large platforms are around for a long time. In the fiscally challenging environment we're in, it's going to be here even longer. Okay, so we have a lot of spiral upgrade programs that we have ongoing. What I'd like to see is tying our S&T into transition or insertion opportunities into the spiral. Okay, spiral insertion. So that's one of the key reasons why I want us to see the spiral capability and lay it out. There's a natural cycle in which our S&T becomes obsolete. You guys know what the X number of years you can't even buy the parts anymore, right? So there's a natural cycle in which you have to refresh your equipment. And there's a cycle in terms we ought to be planning into our budgeting. What this has helped us to do, not just looking in our planning process, working very closely with the GA folks, is looking not just at the pump, but the pump beyond that, right? The longer term plan. So what we found out, there's the efficiencies to be gained within the way that we're doing things by planning out multiple pumps, by looking ahead. So to me, that is a very useful idea that we ended up executing last year. So the S&T folks, I think it's absolutely great Because now what's happening is you have the S&T folks talking to the budgeting folks, talking to the program folks, talking to the requirement folks. That's exactly the kind of linkages you need. So everybody is involved in this long-term planning. Because otherwise, you get one group that's doing the planning, lob it over the fence, right? So I think this long-term perspective has helped the S&T folks also focus on our needs.
I agree with what she said. I would tell you from an S&T perspective, it's helped us to plan and defend our strategy forward.
I think, though, the question, I mean, they ask it, can they have the 30? Because we do a modernization plan that we put out on the street that we get the chief and secretary buy into. And it's not really just about the POM. It really kind of, it's really not the 30-year, but it kind of leads you to that 30-year plan, which if someone wants to, get a hold of me, I'll get you the current that, and then we'll get whatever you need for that. But as Ms. Shyu said, that again, because this fiscal environment, I think, is making us be more critical of ourselves, of how we're looking at it, right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, I think from my perspective, it's very good because, as I said, technology makers, rotorcraft, armor, things that we're very good at, we focus and we can do that. Where we're takers, information technology stuff, then that is going to require us to have a better cooperation with industry, which in the past we've kind of put out, we'll write a requirement, we'll list it out there. I think that dialogue has to be more open as we kind of define to us where we think we are makers, where we think we are takers, and have that dialogue. Because if we don't come to an agreement, then we will all end up wasting a lot of precious dollars that we know we're not going to have over the next few years. So from that perspective, I think we can, I think, to be honest, I think this is going to make us will make us work harder, but I think it will also be more fruitful for us that we're going to get really the products that we need or that the soldiers need, because that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day is get the soldier what he needs, put it in his hands, put it on his back, or put him inside of it, and that's the driving force behind what we do. And so I think this will help us. But I'm more than willing, Ms. Shyu and I, whoever asked the question of 30-year plan or they want a copy.
They actually did talk the 30-year strategic modernization plan. They've been, I know from my perspective, they've been asking, they want those roadmaps to see when technology is going to insert into the acquisition programs. Over to you, Kevin.
I just had a comment about the plan because it's something that I think all of us that look at science and technology on the committees have paid attention to. Beyond and I think part of the value is not just in the sort of road mapping effort, but as a framework of thinking about the problem. And so the longer term value is not necessarily where a certain thing falls on the timeline, but creating a way of thinking on the part of the Army to start to bring together all of these instruments. So the other, where I think there's some additional value is tying together the resourcing and some other policy issues. So for example, in addition to you have your base acquisition program, and what you want to do is on-ramp specific science and technology efforts. But then what I would like to see is additional layering of those other tools at the Army's disposal. So where do the SBIRs fit in that? Where does the ManTech program fit in that? Where does DPA Title III, so when you start talking about broader issues with the industrial base, who's thinking about that to make sure that those issues, and that's where the policy part comes in, gets layered into this larger discussion? Because I think as the budgets go down, there are other tools at the Army's disposal that they could also and probably should use more efficiently to kind of layer these. So it's there are multiple avenues to being able to exert budgetary pressure here. So I just wanted to make that comment about the plan.
I will say we are trying to incorporate that information in, as well as what we are doing with our foreign partners, to make sure we have a holistic look. As you've heard many times, as we come down in the budget, we no longer can be as arrogant as to think we can do it alone. We have to leverage others, and we need to focus on those things that are Army unique and create opportunities for others to help us get the rest of the story that the Army needs.
Including other DoD. So
absolutely.
That reminds me, Coalition Warfare Program, Joint concept technology demonstrations, rapid innovation.
We are
all of it.
absolutely well tied into our sister services in OSD. I'm going to change topics now. This one I've got, an increasingly number of questions on this little thing called NIE. You guys are very interested in it. So I will start the question with General Barkley, and anybody else can chime in when they want to. And it's a multi-part question, but at the end of the day, they're asking, has NIE been
lifeline?
successful? I don't know who set you up, sir. Has NIE been successful? And is it, we talked about it as an agile process in acquisition, and have you seen it beneficial to that? The real concern, though, seems to be, are we going to continue funding it? Are we going to do it just once a year? And from industry, the question is, are you ever going to buy anything?
Well, I mean, those are all good questions. I guess I could go back in reverse order. Yes, we are going to, and we have already bought stuff from NIE. Now, what we haven't bought from NIE are the large, big pieces parts. We have made a lot of small purchases, small things that we have rolled back in very quickly over into theater to put in the hands of soldiers, the technology, small technology. And we have also made changes to existing programs that we have. The beauty of this is when you put it in the hands of soldiers, sometimes a lot of things that you and I or industry or folks sitting in a lab think are great and wonderful. It's amazing what that young 18, 19, 20-year-old, when he looks at it, uses it and says, not quite what we're looking for or not what we need. It's not helping me any here in my decision making or in my battle decisions. So, I mean, from that perspective, NIE has been an eye-opener for us to do that. Do we think, and I can remember when I was a deputy G3, NIE fell under me as we were building it with Land Warnet. We knew going into this that industry would probably reach a point to where they were going to start asking that hard question. But we were very upfront saying that this is not a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year journey. This is a long-term journey as we're starting to look and use that Brigade Modernization Command out there to get after those things that are, some will be short-term, but a lot of them will be long-term decisions that help us decide where we want to go, what we need to buy, or what we need to improve in. So from that perspective, NIE, I think, has been doing that. We also struggled with the fact of, whether you were going to be an SUE and whether you're going to be a SUT or one under evaluation, one under testing. We all know, again, this will lead us back into that chain of what the requirements are, whose side, the testing requirements, what Congress says we have to do, what DOD says we have to do. So it's very complicated when you get into that test environment of what you can and can't do with certain pieces of equipment before it then drives you to large dollars that you may not want to put it into a type of a program that you want to commit those kind of dollars yet until you get a feel for where you're going. So that's why I think the NIE has been very important to us. Is the NIE going to continue? The Secretary and the Chief are very committed to NIE. We understand that because of what it has brought us over the past 3 years, as we've looked at what the outputs of that, but more importantly, what we think we'll get from it in the future, they're committed to doing this. At this point in time, we're in the middle of working a 15-19 POM program. NIE is on the books. There is a question whether it's 2 times, 1 time. That's part of us then getting back to decide what are we trying to get out of this program, again, because we continually self-evaluate NIE and what it brings to us. So right now, I would tell you that it's doing very well as we're moving forward with some of the program issue reviews, and that the senior leaders of the Army are committed to this program. Not that it will not change some in the future. And for industry, the larger industrial partners, those, because that's some of the big ones, some of the big companies I know. Don't know who picked this out, but I'm sure it was probably a larger one, not a smaller one. But that's part of sitting down and understanding what our goals and objectives are for this program versus what maybe industry's goals and objectives are. And some of you, we may not have done as good a job of laying that out and explaining it to you, but we're willing to sit down and do that.
So I'd like to add to that comment what General Barkley had talked about. So in terms of totality of the small things that we bought about $12 million worth of stuff. But what it has also helped us to do is we've incorporated soldier feedback. Number one, that's the most important thing that we actually gotten out of that. So incorporating soldier feedback, we now understand what are the things we need to modify and change to improve its utilization rather than just getting into production, then getting into the hands of the soldier, okay? It has also shaped our acquisition strategy. We have seen stuff that's out there, the company has invested and brought to the table. We have shaped our acquisition strategy. Our maneuver, which we just recently made in a war, was literally what we saw at NIE. So it has shaped our acquisition strategy on a number of important programs.
Ms. Miller, I have a comment I'd like to make on that. Just I think from an industry observation on NIE, because NIE has been, I think, a great effort for the Army to experiment in a lot of issues around testing, around integration, and on requirements. So from an industry perspective, a couple things I think that we take away. Your point, sure, about maker or taker. I think some of the technologies that get brought there are already used commercially. So if we can use that opportunity to kind of streamline the testing then and there, I think we can get product out sooner. Even with those kinds of integrations, they're not just not IT. There's a lot of other types of technologies that are being used in other parts of the DoD or in other agencies, but because of some of the testing processes, we have to go through it again. The second point is about there's not a lot of dollars, obviously. There's not a lot of new program starts. So the NAIE has opened the aperture to say, you know, instead of thinking of acquisition, let's think integration. If we can look across PMs, we can look across programs, we can look across the department and look at capabilities. From the capabilities, we can actually focus on integrating. Save dollars, get faster. Some of them are already tested. It's how we put new things together. And when you think about innovation and where we're going on this 30-year plan, we can actually get benefit right now. Because a lot of innovation transformationally can happen when capabilities that have never been put together before come together. And I think we've seen that the last 12 years in the hands of soldiers. So I think that's another one. And then finally, nothing can replace getting user feedback. When we take NIE and think about agility, just like we apply it to software, it is this iterative, constant feedback. If we can continue to build that into larger platforms, not just software, and by the way, I think a lot of these platforms have a significant amount of software, let's get it in front of users, let's get it in front of soldiers, because they're the greatest litmus tests on the usability.
And so I sit in a lot of forums with folks in theater, and although I'm not an expert on NIE, I will say that the user feedback from the capability set 13 that was demonstrated at an NIE and then outfitted into systems and sent to Afghanistan, they were a little leery of it at first because they didn't know if they wanted to incorporate all of this technology, you know, after the main fighting seasons. But the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive of what that capability set has enabled them to do. So if you want feedback from the warfighter perspective secondhand, it has been a
Well, I think
great
that's, I mean, capability set 13 was a, you know, we were kind of skeptical when we were trying to pull it together, and that was the biggest integration effort we had ever done. That was truly, it wasn't about buying new stuff. It was about taking a lot of old, not old, but demonstrated and integrating it across, and then being able to take it over and place it into an already existing network that existed in Afghanistan. And it is. So there are some payoffs. Now, did it result in a lot of new buys? No. But it did ensure that that would lead us to where we're going in the future and what we need to do. And it also got into the hands of soldiers who were over, you know, fighting every day and made that effort easier and better for them.
So this is a question to our two staffers. An earlier question regarding the impact to DoD modernization as it results to declining budgets got a negative response across the board. And the question to you is, are there any positive impacts to the declining budget? Go ahead, Robbie.
So, I mean, what comes to mind is a quote from Lord Rutherford when he was in charge of the Royal Society many years ago, when he said, when you don't have any money, you're forced to think. So I think the positive side is that it's always a time when you can take the opportunity to go relook through the prioritization, the roles and responsibilities. I mean, we have been, at war for 12 years, right? And so it is a time to sort of take this a strategic pause to look at really what are the priorities, what are the offensive, defensive, national security capabilities that we really want to pursue. So I think in some sense the positive thing is that we really it's a time and opportunity that should be seized to answer to ask some really hard questions. And again, we've talked about the department's S&T enterprise writ large, the health and status of the industrial base, the issues with respect to the federal acquisition sort of enterprise and how conducive is it to innovation. These are all things that we should take time to actually take and have a serious national dialogue on. And then the other key thing I think is that we have to look at all the lessons learned in terms of combat. What are the things that we can actually preserve? What are the things that should be discarded? What are the things that we can do to improve? And one of the things that I like to point out when we always talk about modernization, or really more in science and technology, is we've been focusing now really on sort of the hard technological element. But let's realize with the Army, this is about warfare and the human terrain. So one of the things that I always talk about is that ultimately, the Army being engaged in basically land warfare, you have to still remember there's a human terrain element to this. And we actually have spent a lot of effort trying to understand the human dynamics of our adversaries. And what I fear is that as we sort of tail away from our conflicts, that we're going to be focused on the shiny technologies, but then again, do we still have to understand that warfare is about this human element, the human terrain, and we still have to preserve a deep and enduring capability to be able to understand who our adversaries are, what motivates them, and, quite frankly, warfare today is not just about kinetics. There's also the whole information operations, the cyber element of warfare. Are we thinking about that? So we need to balance between the kinetic and the non-kinetic. And the last thing I'll say is why I feel this is important, because at the height of our operations in Iraq, when al-Zawahiri, the number 2 in al-Qaeda, sent a missive over to Zarqawi in Iraq saying, look, half of our conflict is going to take place in the media. So if our adversaries are operating in this domain and we basically abdicate our operational, our operations in part of that battle space, what's our probability of ultimately winning? So that's an important element I think we have to sort of think about during this time period.
I'd have to echo Robbie's comments. I mean, particularly the issue about, I think, rethinking core competencies for not just the Army, but the other services, and also the dependencies upon one another. So during the last big drawdown in the 90s, from a science and technology perspective, the services were forced into this reliance process where the 3 services sat down and said, this is probably more you than me, so I'm going to rely on you to be the lead for this area, and I'm going to follow and support for my service unique aspects to that. And what I saw as I was starting to work on the Hill, the impact of 10 years where the budgets were flush and people didn't have to operate quite as closely in terms of relying on one another for specific things, got them out of that mindset. And so you saw the reliance process all but die because it just didn't fit the budget environment at that time. What I've seen even just within the last year is more discussion, even though a lot of people don't, I think a lot of people that we deal with now don't necessarily remember reliance or even know what it is. What they're talking about is the essence of exactly the same sorts of things that happened in the 90s. The other thing, I guess, is related to core competencies, and I think, Mary, you mentioned this a couple of times in terms of there are certain things that the Army does really well, and I think the Army and the other services have to sit down and really do a hard think about what those things are so that they can understand what capabilities they are going to want to preserve. Because again, 10 years flush budgets, what we saw was mission creep in terms of things, the military doing things out of necessity that it felt it needed to do to get the job done. And I don't think anyone would have qualms with that. It was what was necessary to, for life and limb in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it really requires us to start to sit back and think, what of those things that we took on do we really need to do? And I think one potential positive outcome out of this will really put our money where our mouth is when it comes to whole of government, because we've talked about it, but in terms of and there are some niche areas I think where it's been done really well, but I think that there are a whole lot of other areas that have sort of languished by the wayside because of the threat of Al-Qaeda and terrorism and the wars in the Middle East. And I think this is an opportunity not only for the services and DoD to find ways to rely on one another, but to do that in a whole of government way.
Angie, a comment?
Yeah. Go ahead. Just going with both of these comments, yeah, the budget cuts are there, but I think I agree with both of you. With challenges comes opportunity. There's an opportunity. I go to your last point about, we talked about integration, but enterprise integration is a concept we have to actually talk about. And I think actually the Department of Homeland Security, other agencies are actually turning to the DoD, because I think the DoD actually does a good job of that, can do better as they look towards partnering with DHS and other agencies for a lot of these issues that we're facing. Because again, seeing across horizontal, I see some of the same problems around information, around data, around other types of mission-type solutions. But from an industry standpoint, I don't know many of you out there from industry, obviously we're impacted because of the budget cuts and what we do to support. And I think it's also given us a chance to take a strategic pause, to take a look at how do we innovate? How do we build a culture of innovation in our own organizations? How do we do a little cleaning house? I've got a lot of different kinds of clients, and I would say, talking to other industry counterparts, it might just be me, but innovation is everywhere. That topic, well, it's the chiefs and secretaries' second priority. So innovation is something I think we all have to have in tune our minds, because that is the mother when there's, mother of innovation is because there's needs, there's financial crunches, and there's needs for improvement in modernization. I think from an industry standpoint, as we kind of look ourselves, about a year ago we looked at forming our own innovation group, because you need catalysts and you need a way to kind of lead the charge and symbolize it. For us, besides looking at improving the work that we're doing for clients, it sort of revitalized our entire workforce. When you energize, and going back to people, this is a people business. The Army's a people business in the services rather than the product side, which I know my partner here from IBM, but even in his company, it's a people business. So you've got to recruit, retain, and motivate, and they want to work on projects that are interesting, that are going to make a difference. But you also have to have the tools and infrastructure there. So where are we looking our tools and infrastructure? Where are we looking our processes? And we're actually looking at across the portfolio of what we're actually investing. So I'll finally say that it takes partnership, not just as you do the whole of government, but clearly industry and the government to continue the partnership that I think we've been on, whether it's public-private partnerships or non-traditional ways of how we partner together that maybe perhaps we haven't even thought of.
I'll give this question to Johnny, because I haven't heard from him in a while. Mr. Kendall has raised serious concerns over company-funded R&D expenditures as the budgets come down. He's concerned that they also would decrease their investment in IRAD. Is the company-funded IRAD adequate currently? And if not, what could be done to increase it? Is this simply a question of more is better, or can we use it more effectively? That's a multi-part question.
So let me address that. First of all, I think that there's a need to more effectively leverage that capability than we do today. And it also goes back to some of the issues with transition of those things that are developed under the IRAD and its transition into the overall usage. systems to make that transition, I think, are not as effective as they need to be, and that's across the board. And from our experience, we found that to make that transition has to be a partnership between the end user organization as well as the investment in emerging technology, and making sure that it has a path to not only deliver the capability that it is being developed for, or that has been promoted from a requirement standpoint, but the failures come, at least from my perspective, and even within industry as we transition technology, is that transition into actual deployment and integration is where it all fails. And if we don't have a process by which you're going to facilitate that transition, then it has a higher probability of failure. And I'll use IBM as an example. When we did an analysis, when we were having our problems back in the 90s and had the budget problem with no funding, we found that a fair amount of our development dollars were being lost because we were going down a path and then we killed programs and because they didn't deliver. And we had to fix that problem. Part of the research transformation that I talked about was part of that, but we found that this investment in users of that technology being a part of the IRAD and closely connected actually facilitates better acceptance of that when it transitions into usage. And I was hearing some of the usage in the NIE capability and acceptance of that. You sort of make that transition and allow individuals to actually accept it. And we use the individuals that participated as advocates. And because they were members of the community, they were very successful in promoting that. So on my side, I think we need to invest in a process by which we can make IRAD capabilities better transition in. It does get into the integration, acceptance by users, and managing that effectively. And I wanted to comment back on the PM because there was discussions about PMs. We found that in emerging technology areas, PMs with just programmatic capabilities, with no support from a technical standpoint to be able to question and really help drive the right decisions from an implementation standpoint and delivery of capability, is destined for failure. Because too many times in our case, there are decisions made where there wasn't sufficient questioning of those decisions by knowledgeable people to help do the right thing and deliver the right capability. So all of those, I think, are ways that you can improve the current level of investment and deliver more capability into actual usage by managing that whole process.
Thank you. This is a question to General McQuistion. And Ms. Shyu, I expect you'll probably want to weigh in as well. Given the Chief of Staff of the Army's statement on S&T importance for the future of the Army, how will ASALT and AMC move forward to ensure that we are developing integrated technologies to get after the complexity of emerging threats? And there was a second question related, and it's, where do you see the future of RDE Command in executing the Chief's vision there?
Well, to answer the first question, together. How will we do it? We have to do it together in an integrated and synchronized fashion from the beginning, and with our ARCIC and TRADOC partners, the folks that are setting the requirements, identifying what we're after. RDECOM certainly has a role through its RDEX. You know, we say that RDECOM's mission is to identify the space between the state of the art and the art of the possible. And so you've got to be in there, as you said, this is a people business. You've got to be in there and keeping attuned to what the state of the state-of-the-art is, driving the state-of-the-art in so many areas in our engagements, both on a national and an international basis, and then bringing all of that in to describe what is possible to deliver. And you have to do it absolutely in consonance with the entire members of the team of ASALT. You know, bringing it in, not just the material aspects, but the human aspects, and what are the facilities aspects, and what are all of the other, you know, the doctrine and the organization of the soldiers that are going to be using this technology. So it takes, you know, a very, very coordinated and very thoughtful approach to how we bring 30-year plan in and deliver the capabilities, but also with a life cycle concept of how we're going to use it and sustain it over time. And you can't do that. No one element of the Army can do that without the full integration and synchronization of the rest. I will say one positive aspect of the current budget situations is that it has brought us all together. We are talking very much more. Usually Jim's saying no money, and the rest of us are saying, okay, well, how are we going to think our way through delivering capability and readiness?
Yeah, I absolutely concur with what General McCushion has said. S&T, for the sake of S&T, doesn't do us any good if it doesn't ultimately transition into the hands of the warfighter. Okay, so that's the piece. Everybody has a role to play. It's integrating all these capability together that's absolutely essential. So I completely concur with that.
Ma'am, I've got a follow-on question to you. Well, it's actually not a follow-on. It's kind of a diversion to this. But it was a question by a graduate student here in the audience, and it says, the Better Buying Power 2.0. Are these budget pressures actually reversing everything we tried to do with that particular better buying power and gaining efficiencies?
I can tell you the budget morass that we're in today with the CR followed by sequestration, followed by furloughs, and followed by government shutdown, and now back to CR again. This has just utterly decimated a lot of stuff we're trying to do with a Better Buying Power 2.0, which is planned for a stable environment. Okay, the rippling effects of the physical instability that we're in, it's tremendous impacts. Okay, nevertheless, we're still trying to do what's prudent within Better Buying Power, namely things that we're doing are, when we look at a contract, we're looking at a program as a moving forward. The PM is supposed to look at not just what the program is going to cost. The PM is expected to identify what the program should cost. And the delta is the efficiency that can be gained by doing things more smartly. Okay? And in addition to part of the BBP that we're doing is looking at the type of contracts that we have. Do we have the right type of contract to incentivize the contractor to meet the schedule, to meet the performance, and meet the reliability? So all of those are the things that we continue to do, even smack in the middle of the swirl of the fiscal uncertainties. But I can tell you the fiscal uncertainty, going back to what General Barkley said, you know, we're planning two POMs, right? The POM PB, which is POM high, POM BCA, which is POM low, and then the POM be gone. Okay.
I will tell you, I think everyone ought to read, though, Better Buying Power 2.0. And when I say that, it's not just those of us who deal with it every day. Everyone needs to understand what, I think, when they put that out, what we were trying to get at. And that's also at OSD level, because Ms. Shyu does a very good job at is in trying to defend and go up. But we find ourselves fighting the other processes and other bodies at OSD that sometimes don't read their own documents. Now, I'm being very blunt about it, but I mean, we sit in some of these devs and try to defend products or programs, and we say this fits right in. This is page 8 of what you're trying to say to do it cheaper, better, faster, and it's like, well, but you didn't check 2 boxes because in the process on page 497, paragraph 3, you know, you didn't. Okay. I mean, that's part of the challenges we have. but at least we are trying to do a better job, and we do talk more about it.
Yeah. I think the reality of the environment that we're in, it's a very risk-averse environment. And this is why we have to produce 80 different documents between each milestone. This poor PM is just dragged through a knothole, right? Trying to make sure everything's dotted and every T's crossed. It's because we're living very risk-averse environment who won't accept any failures. It's not like 30 years ago. The environment's very different. If you did a launch and it failed, it blew up, it's okay. You learn from it. You move on to the next design. It's not acceptable anymore, and that's the environment we're living in, which is very unfortunate.
So this is a question to anybody on the panel who wants to take it on. It is from a Canadian Army member who says, it's not from small business, but it is from a small army. And I'll put it in a little bit of context. Yesterday, if you were here yesterday and you sat in on the Army After 2020 panel discussions, there was a lot of discussion on seeking more innovation as we go forward into the future. And it kind of aligns to what our Canadian colleague has asked, because he tells a little story. Actually, it's a long story about how he had a washing machine that was 18 years old, and it finally broke down, never required maintenance, broke down. He got a brand new state-of-the-art one. Within 12 months, he had to replace the sensor on it, and he's starting to think, wait, this really wasn't a great idea. 18 years, no maintenance, and brand new fancy thing, and it's broken almost right away. And his real question is, what is the right balance of sustainability with, the perishable leading technology? If we're going to go for innovation, where is that balance between those things that are tried and true and we know will work, and inserting new technology? So who wants to try it first?
I'd like to give that a try. I think that's a great question. By the way, I've seen the same thing. Okay, as technology continues to migrate, it gets more and more complex. You have more probability of failures, okay, than simple analog system that we used to have. If you look at what we're doing on a lot of our major platform, we drive the reliability goal because that reduces our operational maintenance costs. So therefore, we set the bar for where we are today in the current environment or legacy programs where the reliability threshold is at. We drive all of our newer spiral insertion program to be higher reliability because you want less maintenance. You don't want more, right? Going the opposite way. On the flip side, there are things we're looking at. Should we change the doctrine of how we buy things in RT? In the sense that if we have radio, if we can drive the price of the radio down a lot cheaper, okay, do we need to be replacing it and learning how to fix it, or do we just buy the next new one? Let's say look at your cell phone. How many people hang on to a cell phone that's 5 years old, right? It's a brick, right? Oh, other than my mom, nobody else probably in this room will probably still has one that old, okay? 5 years.
No, not quite 5.
Okay. So we're looking at things, if the things that's driving the technology is migrating quick enough, so the unit cost is down cheap enough, so you can perhaps spiral the technology quickly. You don't need to do the maintenance on it. So that's
Well, I think I would add, though, you talked about it. If you read our modernization plan, we talk about all these things about technology and how the fact sometimes it may cost you more than what you thought it was going to cost you. And so I think part of that is we talk about relying on some of these mature technologies. We talk about also our refreshing rate on our technologies and where you go at them and understanding the difficulties you will have as you try to do that. And we're also looking at that. But I think the fact that sometimes we rush into immature systems, and that then brings you complex costs as you're trying to get back at where you're going or what your end result was trying to be. And so I think, as we move forward and look at our programs, we've got to make sure that we aren't jumping too fast. That's part of having the right S&T program that will allow you to take and mature and get at things that then you're not just replacing sensors all the time because they're failed because you didn't do your homework before you got to that stage of the game. So I think it's part of part of our view is we're taking the long view to look ahead to do better than, and we're right, we all know, as it's been said up here, it's been couched in many different terms, of flushing cash or getting the soldiers what they need when they needed it. We did take a lot of risk, and we did a lot of things because we could do it, because we had the great support from Congress about to give us those things because of the risk involved and what it meant to our soldiers. So sometimes we would buy things very rapidly and know that it might not just work as well as we want, but then we could change it. But if it made it better 2 weeks, 3 months, in the lives of those soldiers that were fighting, that's the focus that we had. And so now we've got it's a little bit different. We've got to take a step back and refocus on where we're moving in the future.
I'd just like to add, we look at our systems and the life cycle cost of systems, and we know that about 70 to 75% of the cost life cycle of a system is in the sustainment costs and the upgrade costs over time. And so I think one of the areas we could do better in is, and as we're generating the requirements, we do have reliability, and we do pay a lot of attention to the reliability, but oftentimes we find out in the trade space those sustainability factors are sometimes traded off, and so we're not looking necessarily at total life cycle costs in the way that might be most beneficial to us. And I would say that we no longer have trucks and tanks and helicopters. We have network systems, and what has really grown exponentially is the cost of the sustainment and licensing of the software embedded in all of those systems. And so we have to really think our way through how we will do software sustainment over time as part of that life cycle.
Just 2 comments. I think it's instructive to look at what's happening in the space arena and sort of draw whether there are any lessons that are applicable or not to the ground combat arena. Given that the period or the trend over the last number of decades has been to basically build spacecraft that are much more complicated, they become these enormous Christmas trees that you put all these sensors and all this functionality, become very expensive. If they fail, you really have a significant loss of capability. There's now been a school of thought that's been looking at things like disaggregation of space systems, fractionation of space systems, that actually at some point we have to ask ourselves, have we gotten that our systems are too complex, we actually have to go in the opposite direction? So it's kind of an interesting sort of philosophical question to ask this community, is the trends of what we're seeing in the space as well as even some of the airborne side. If you look at the Next Generation Air Dominance Initiative that Mr. Kendall has launched, that's not just about the next generation of fighter. It's about a family of systems that you're not going to put all the functionality on one platform. How do you disaggregate? So that's something that I think the community is going to have to think about. The other thing is I want to put in a plug that Kevin had actually mentioned about prototyping and getting back to the role of the S&T community. And again, Mr. Kendall, the Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, is keen on this. And the fundamental issue here is that when we talk about risk, and I wanted to really say something about this, the environment for being risk adverse, there is a spectrum along which you should be risk averse or not. When we launched 13 satellites in the early days of the National Reconnaissance Office and all failed, right, we were still in that early S&T period. But today, when we have a system that is going to go to OT&E and you fail that operational test and evaluation, shame on that program manager. So what our community needs to do is be able to take a lot of risk early on, like the DARPAs of the world. If you expect that you're only going to have a success rate of maybe 30%, 40% at most of your programs, that may be acceptable because you're learning. But once you transition, and as to a certain point, where you start a program of record, that's where you start to have to now start battening down the hatches of what risk risk tolerance, basically. And the last thing I think that's important about prototyping, and it gets back to the workforce. We need in our community the mechanisms to go through the conceptualize, the design, the build, and the test the cycle. If you look again in the aerospace community, we, during the golden age of aviation, the 50s and 60s, we went through this cycle many times. We built a lot of X-planes. Industry participated. They built a lot of different of these experimental aircraft. There was no expectation that that X-plane would lead to a program of record. It was you were exercising your workforce through that design cycle. Number 2, you were doing risk reduction so that ultimately when you decided to do a program of record, you did have technologies that were available. And I think in the ground combat arena, we have to start thinking about about this element of what are those experimental mechanisms or platforms that you can actually develop, exercise your workforce more rapidly through that entire cycle, and then actually, transition to program record. I think it's very key when we talk about people again and that design cycle. The analogy is you go to your doctor, and if you ask your doctor, "Hey doc, I have to have this procedure done. How many times have you done it?" And he or she says, "I've been doing some modeling and simulation on this, but I haven't done it too many times." What are you going to do? So it's the same thing with our design, our engineering teams. We need to be able to have them exercise that cycle and not wait, until 2 decades down the road when we actually have an IOC of a capability.
One comment I'd like to make in this area, it has to do with emerging technology, but we found that in the sustainment area, there's innovation that's needed in that, and there has to be a focused effort to have thought put into how do I sustain this more effectively and reduce that cost. And so we have a conscious effort in most of our programs that not only looks at the delivery and deployment, but afterwards in the life cycle, sustainment innovation is just as important because that drives costs down.
If I can just interject one comment that I think goes along in line with that, and some of the acquisition folks here may disagree with some of this, but I mean, in my mind, this is more an issue of culture than it is technology. On one hand, you have an acquisition system that has been designed and inculcated to design that 18-year-old flawless washing machine. And so we put a lot of effort into that, but then you get to the point where when you do need maintenance, it becomes even more difficult to sustain in the long run. And so that's where you start to meet that cost curve where the cost of continuing to try to limp something along versus scrapping it and going to a new system, I think, comes into play. The other thing, and this is where there may be some disagreement, I mean, from my vantage point, looking at this on the committee, it seems to me that there's a lot of lip service given to this issue of reliability, affordability, sustainability, but when it comes down to it, that becomes your trade space for a program. So when you get to a point where potentially baking in some amount of funding to look at the sustainability or affordability issue comes into conflict with where you are in cost and schedule, that's one of the things that's going to go overboard before you're willing to breach either of those other two areas.
I have to comment. I can't stop myself. And it follows up what both Robbie and Kevin said. In this bathtub of acquisition that we're facing over the next 5 years, much is being asked of the science and technology community. And sorry to say for them that I spent about 18 months happily as Deputy Program Executive Officer for Soldier and got to experience acquisition from their side of the world. And I understand it's very difficult. One of my former PMs here in the audience who was going hoo-ah when we said that the PM is the tick on the tail of the dog, not because of that, but because he has no control over his programs. But the reality is that what they're asking S&T to do is to step up and start addressing some of these reliability aspects, manufacturability aspects, while it's still in S&T, while we have the ability to make mistakes affordably, because once you get into programs of record, everything just gets exponentially more expensive. Part of what the Army did, and I'd like to say in their great wisdom, is they established a BA4 account for the S&T community. That falls under my responsibility. BA4 is a budget designation that allows you to do advanced component development and prototyping. It is the way we can do prototypes and not have to have finalized requirements. It is a way that we can do prototyping to understand the integration challenges and inform the requirements that make that program of record much more successful. As you said, 13 launches and all failures, but it was okay. It was S&T. We learned what not to do. I agree. We can't afford to do that when it gets to a program of record. So that's the challenge that's been handed to the S&T community. I think they're good for it. I've been working with the S&T community for 29 plus years, and I think they're just awesome. They're underrepresented and under-recognized for what they can bring to this Army, and we're going to be challenging them to step up and be heard, because a lot of eyes are on them. No worries, guys.
Okay.
Question before, did you want to?
Interject one thing. I know our esteemed colleagues over the Hill think we pay lip service, reliability, affordability, sustainability. I would like some of our PMs to show the amount of torture that they go through to make sure that they meet reliability before they pass through each milestone, and how much scrutiny that they're under affordability. Okay, so it's not lip service. You don't go through the same amount of torture that our PMs have to go through to prove that you've achieved the reliability. And DOTE is there to make sure that you prove that you met the reliability. And CAPE is there to make sure that you meet the affordability. So we go through an awful lot of knotholes to make sure that we meet that. So it's, to me, it's not lip service. Okay.
All right, and we have one last question before Ms. Shyu wraps up, and that's going to be on the common operating environment. And anybody can answer, but I'm guessing Ms. Shyu is going to weigh in. How do you envision the Army's transition to a common operating environment facilitating equipment modernization?
Okay, so I think a lot of the folks probably in this room, at least some of these folks in this room, have been working on the common operating environment. So to me, it's an interface standard. Okay, what we're driving for is a common open interface so that we can in the future spiral capabilities and not have to redesign all of the hardware and software at the same time. So think about it, I consider it as a almost like an isolation layer. You can upgrade. Think about it. You can upgrade your software without changing your hardware. You can upgrade your hardware without changing your software, right? So I think, in my mind, establishing a common operating environment enables you to do that. I mean, it's just smart design, right? So, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now it's your opportunity to close up the panel. First, I would like to thank every one of the panel members. I think this has been a great exercise. I would say that I probably have twice as many questions that I couldn't get through, so I do apologize for that. And one that Ms. Shyu might want to think about when she gives a close-up, there was a question as to whether or not what you see, your experience in industry, are we missing something in our civilian and military workforce that helps us do acquisition from your experience?
So I would say, having spent 33 years of my career in industry, then coming into the government, I am just incredibly impressed with the dedication of the folks that's within the civilian workforce within the Army. It is unprecedented, unmatched, okay? So anybody who bad-mouths Army civilian, I want to wring their neck, okay? Okay. It frustrates me to no end to see the government civilians get slammed, okay? Because I see how hard they work. No matter what job you throw at them, they salute and they charge at it, okay? And so I can tell you this was very eye-opening to me coming into the government, because the perception you get, oh yeah, 9 to 5, they're out of there. I don't know anybody who works 9 to 5, okay? So that's one piece I think is really, really important, just getting the right message out. The other thing that I think I have seen, just the difference between industry and government. Government, sometimes we don't do a very good job of articulating our message. Okay, we play the defensive, or more so than we do in industry, in which you hire a PR firm on your side to help you shape the messaging. So every single message that comes out is very polished. So those are the vast differences that I see between the two sides, between industry and the government. But I can tell you one thing. This government job is probably the most rewarding job I have ever had. And that is, in no small part, due to the incredible dedication, the integrity of the folks I work with, the soldiers that we're providing our equipments to. There's no word that can ever describe what we are all doing for our soldiers. And that's why we're here. This is why we're suffering through the friggin' furloughs, the fiscal turmoil, the ridiculousness of what we have to face through in the budget instability, okay? This is why our civilians are still here. We're here to help serve our soldiers, period. Thank you.
Thank you very much.